My name is Abraham Wilson, and at 35 years old, I never expected to be sitting in a courtroom watching my own sister being sentenced. Growing up in our family, Jessica was the golden child while I was the disappointment who chose public service over prestige. When Jessica spiraled and abandoned her son Tyler, I stepped in to raise him. My family told everyone I failed the child they didn't want. As I sat quietly at my sister's trial, her judge suddenly looked at me and whispered something that made the entire room freeze. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear how a single moment of recognition changed everything. I grew up in a small town in Minnesota, where everyone knew everyone. Our family lived in a modest two-story house that my parents, Margaret and Richard Wilson, stretched themselves thin to afford. From the outside, we looked like the perfect middle-class American family, but appearances were everything to my parents, especially my mother. Perception is reality, Abraham, she would remind me constantly. What people think of you determines your worth in this world. This mindset dictated everything in our household. My father worked as a loan officer at the local bank, while my mother taught English at the high school. They weren't wealthy, but they were respected in the community, and that respect was currency more valuable than dollars in their eyes. My sister Jessica was born 3 years after me, and from day one, she was the favorite. She had my mother's delicate features and my father's charm. More importantly, she understood the family currency of status and appearances early on. Jessica joined all the right clubs, made friends with all the right people, and brought home report cards that my mother proudly displayed on the refrigerator. Why can't you be more like your sister? Became the unofficial family motto, directed at me throughout my childhood. It wasn't that I was a bad student or a troublemaker. I just had different interests. While Jessica was winning beauty pageants and debate competitions, I was volunteering at the local homeless shelter and organizing food drives. My parents saw these activities as nice hobbies, but ultimately a waste of time. Charity won't pay the bills, Abraham, my father would say, with a disappointed sigh. You need to focus on building a future for yourself. By future, he meant following the path they had laid out: prestigious university, law school, or business school, then a high-paying career that would earn respect and envy from others. The fact that I wanted to help people was seen as naive at best and embarrassing at worst. The first major rift between us came during my senior year of high school. Despite having the grades for better schools, I chose the state university with a strong social work program over the Ivy League options my parents had dreamed of. The night I announced my decision, my mother cried real tears. We sacrificed everything to give you opportunities, and this is how you repay us? She sobbed while my father sat in stony silence. Jessica, 16 at the time, watched from the staircase with a mixture of confusion and relief. I later realized the relief came from no longer having to compete with me for my parents' approval. By choosing my own path, I had forfeited the race. College years were lonely. My parents rarely called, and when they did, the conversations were short and tense. I threw myself into my studies and volunteering, finding purpose in a world outside my family's narrow vision of success. I graduated with honors with a degree in social work and public administration, walking across the stage to receive my diploma with only a few friends cheering me on. My family sent a card, but didn't attend. I secured a job with the County Social Services Department straight out of college, helping families in crisis. The pay was modest, but the work was meaningful. Each time I helped a child find stability or a family access resources they desperately needed, I felt a sense of fulfillment that no corner office could provide. Meanwhile, Jessica followed the approved path. She attended an elite university, joined a prestigious sorority, and seemed destined for the success my parents had always envisioned. But underneath the perfect exterior, cracks were forming that none of us could see yet. As I established myself in public service, moving up to program coordinator and then department manager, my family continued to view my career with thinly veiled disappointment. Abraham is doing his little government job, my mother would tell relatives and friends, as if I was still playing pretend and would eventually grow out of it. At family gatherings, which became increasingly rare as years passed, my father would introduce Jessica, her accomplishments, and her potential, then gesture vaguely in my direction and mumble something about me working for the county. I learned to accept their disapproval as the cost of living authentically. What I couldn't have predicted was how our different paths would eventually collide in ways that would change all of our lives forever. As Jessica entered her mid-20s, the perfect facade began to crumble. The promising career in marketing she had started after college became a series of jobs she couldn't keep. Her relationships followed a troubling pattern. Charming men with serious issues she thought she could fix. I would get occasional calls from her, usually late at night, when she needed money or a place to stay after another relationship had imploded. Despite everything, she was still my sister, and I tried to help when I could, though she would disappear again once the immediate crisis passed. Then came the news that Jessica was pregnant. The father was a guy named Marcus she'd been dating for only a few months. My parents, predictably, were mortified about the impending scandal, but quickly shifted to damage control. They threw an elaborate engagement party, though anyone with eyes could see Jessica and Marcus had no business getting married. The engagement fell apart before the baby arrived. Jessica showed up at my apartment one rainy night, 7 months pregnant and alone. "He left," was all she said before collapsing into tears on my couch. I let her stay with me until Tyler was born. Those were challenging months, with Jessica swinging between determination to be a good mother and despair that she'd ruined her life. My parents visited exactly once, bringing baby supplies and thinly veiled judgment. If she had just finished her MBA like we suggested, none of this would have happened. My mother whispered to my father, loudly enough for Jessica to hear from the next room. After Tyler was born, Jessica seemed to rally. She found an apartment, got a job as an administrative assistant, and for a while, appeared to be managing. I visited often, bringing supplies and spending time with my nephew, who was a bright, curious baby, with Jessica's blue eyes and an easy smile. But appearances, as my mother had taught us both, could be deceiving. The calls started when Tyler was around 2. Neighbors concerned about crying. Jessica asking if I could take Tyler for the weekend because she needed a break. Then the weekends became weeks. Jessica would drop Tyler off with a bag of clothes and vague promises about when she'd return. I adjusted my life around these impromptu visits, creating a space for Tyler in my small apartment and becoming familiar with his routines and preferences. My superiors at work were understanding, allowing me flexible hours when Tyler was with me. Then came the night that changed everything. My phone rang at 11:30 p.m., but it wasn't Jessica. It was a police officer, informing me that my sister had been arrested for driving under the influence with Tyler in the car. By some miracle, they hadn't been in an accident, but a concerned citizen had reported a car swerving dangerously and called it in. I rushed to the police station to find Tyler clutching a stuffed dinosaur, being watched by a kind officer who had given him cookies and juice. His eyes lit up when he saw me, and he ran into my arms. "Uncle Abraham." I was scared, but Officer Mike gave me cookies. Mommy was acting weird again. The again broke my heart. Child Protective Services was already involved. The social worker, ironically someone I had trained years earlier, explained that Tyler would need emergency placement while Jessica's case was assessed. "I'll take him," I said without hesitation. The process of becoming Tyler's foster parent was expedited due to my relationship and my background in social services. Within days, he was officially placed in my care, while Jessica was mandated to enter a substance abuse program and attend parenting classes if she wanted to regain custody. When my parents found out, their reaction was swift and harsh, but not in the way I expected. "How dare you take advantage of Jessica's struggles to take her child?" my mother hissed during a tense phone call. "She just needs support, not to have her son taken away." "I didn't take him away, Mom. CPS placed him with me because Jessica was endangering him." "You always were jealous of your sister," she continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "Now you've found the perfect way to hurt her." What stunned me most was that despite their outrage, neither of my parents offered to take Tyler themselves. They lived in a large house with plenty of space. They were retired now, with time to care for a child. But the inconvenience and potential embarrassment of explaining their daughter's situation to friends and neighbors outweighed their concern for their own grandson. Instead, they criticized my every decision from afar. My apartment was too small. My job didn't pay enough. I didn't know the first thing about raising a child. All valid concerns on the surface, but hollow coming from people who weren't willing to help in any meaningful way. Meanwhile, I was thrown into single parenthood overnight. Tyler, at 4 years old, was confused and frightened. He had nightmares and tantrums. He asked for his mother constantly at first. I had to learn everything on the fly. Preschool drop-offs, pediatrician appointments, how to comfort a child who cried for his absent mother. "Where is Mommy? Why can't I go home?" Tyler would ask. His small face crumpled in confusion. I struggled to find age-appropriate answers that were honest but not scary. "Mommy is sick right now and needs special doctors to help her get better. You're staying with me until she feels better." Somehow, we managed. I moved us to a 2-bedroom apartment, stretching my budget to the breaking point. I learned to cook more than just bachelor meals. I read parenting books late into the night and joined a support group for kinship caregivers. And slowly, Tyler and I found our rhythm. His nightmares became less frequent. He made friends at his new preschool. He started calling my apartment our house instead of Uncle Abraham's place. The first time he reached for my hand automatically, when we crossed the street, I felt something shift in my chest. This child trusted me completely to keep him safe. It was terrifying and wonderful, all at once. Jessica, meanwhile, started her court-ordered programs, but struggled to maintain consistency. She would have periods of progress followed by disappearances and relapses. Her visits with Tyler were sporadic, and often ended with him in tears from promises she couldn't keep. "Next time I'll take you to the zoo, buddy. I promise," she'd say. But next time would come and go without a word from her. Tyler would wait by the window, dinosaur clutched to his chest, until I gently led him away to distract him with a game or a story. Each disappointment left a new crack in his heart, and in mine. Through it all, my parents maintained that I was the problem. If I had supported Jessica better, if I hadn't taken Tyler, if I hadn't always been so judgmental, their daughter would be fine, and their family intact. The narrative they created had no room for Jessica's choices or my sacrifices. But every night, as I tucked Tyler into bed, read him stories, and watched him sleep peacefully, I knew I had made the only choice I could. Whatever my family thought, this child needed stability, safety, and love. And somehow, despite never planning to be a parent, I was now the one person in the world who could provide all three. While adjusting to life as Tyler's guardian, I continued my work in public service with renewed purpose. My experiences navigating the child welfare system, as both a professional and a kinship caregiver, gave me unique insights that my colleagues valued. I developed new programs to support families like ours, creating resources I wished had existed when Tyler first came to live with me. As Tyler settled into our life together, attending kindergarten and making friends in our apartment complex, I was approached by several community leaders about an unexpected opportunity: running for city council. "We need someone who understands families and social services," explained Eleanor, a longtime community activist who had become a mentor to me. "Someone who has lived experience and professional expertise. Someone like you, Abraham." My immediate reaction was to laugh. Me, a politician, with a 6-year-old and a full-time job? But Eleanor was persistent, precisely because of those things. "You understand what working families need." The idea took root, though the logistics seemed impossible. Campaign meetings were scheduled around Tyler's soccer practice and bedtime routines. I wrote policy positions at my kitchen table while helping with first-grade homework. Our limited budget meant homemade campaign signs and a lot of door-to-door conversations instead of glossy mailers. Tyler, now understanding more about the world, became my most enthusiastic supporter. "My uncle is running for city council," he would announce proudly to anyone who would listen, from grocery store cashiers to his pediatrician. "He helps families, and he's gonna help more families if he wins." His simple explanation became my campaign slogan: helping families build better lives. Against all odds, I won the election by a narrow margin. The night of my victory, Tyler stayed up past his bedtime to celebrate with me and my small campaign team in our living room. "Are you the boss of the city now?" he asked sleepily as I carried him to bed later. "No, buddy. I'm just one of the people who helps make decisions for our city. There are 8 council members and the mayor, but you're the best one," he mumbled as he drifted off to sleep. My parents' reaction to my election was a brief, formal congratulation card. No phone call, no visit. Jessica, in one of her more stable periods, sent a text message. "Saw you in the newspaper. Congrats." Over the next 5 years, I continued to rise in local politics, moving from city council to county commissioner, building a reputation as someone who could work across divisions to get things done. Tyler grew from a small boy still haunted by early trauma to a confident preteen who excelled in school and had a close group of friends. Our life together wasn't perfect, but it was good. The temporary guardianship had become permanent as Jessica cycled through rehab programs and relationships, never achieving the stability needed to regain custody. Tyler still saw her occasionally, but he had stopped asking when he would go back to live with her. In his mind and heart, our home was now his home. Then came the call that would change our lives again. The lieutenant governor of our state had resigned amid scandal, and the governor needed to appoint a replacement. My name had been suggested by several influential people who had worked with me over the years. "We need someone with integrity," the governor told me during our first meeting. "Someone who understands regular people and their challenges. Your background in social services and your record in local government make you an interesting candidate." I was floored by the opportunity but hesitant about what it would mean for Tyler and me. A move to the state capital, more public scrutiny, less time together. "What do you think, buddy?" I asked Tyler that night over dinner. This would be a big change for us. At 11, he was old enough to have a say in decisions that affected his life. He considered the question with the seriousness only a child can muster for adult matters. "Would you still help families? Like you do now?" "Yes, but more families across the whole state." He nodded thoughtfully. "Then I think you should do it. We can handle big changes, right? We already did the hardest one." I knew he meant the night he came to live with me, and my heart swelled with pride at the resilient young person he was becoming. I accepted the position, and we moved to a modest house near the capital. Tyler started at a new school, and I began the steep learning curve of statewide governance. The media took some interest in my story. The bachelor uncle raising his sister's son while serving in government. Most coverage was positive, though there were occasional insinuations about why my sister wasn't raising her own child. I maintained a strict policy of never discussing Jessica's struggles publicly, despite questions. "My focus is on my nephew's well-being, and serving the people of this state," became my standard response. A year into my term as lieutenant governor, another seismic shift occurred. The governor announced he would not seek re-election due to health concerns, and endorsed me as his successor. After a challenging but ultimately successful campaign, I found myself in a position I never could have imagined, governor of our state. The night of my inauguration, Tyler, now 13, stood beside me, looking both proud and slightly overwhelmed by the attention. "Does this mean I have to wear ties all the time now?" he whispered as cameras flashed around us. "Only on special occasions," I assured him with a smile. My parents declined the invitation to attend the inauguration, sending another card with perfunctory congratulations. Jessica sent nothing at all, having disappeared into another relationship and another city. Despite reaching a position that even my status-conscious parents should have recognized as successful, they maintained their narrative that I had somehow failed in life, that my choices were disappointing, that taking in Tyler had been some sort of power play rather than an act of love and responsibility. Their absence stung, but as I looked at Tyler, growing taller and stronger every day, excelling in school, and developing his own passion for community service, I knew I had succeeded in the only way that truly mattered. As I adjusted to my unexpected role as governor, while raising a teenager, Jessica's life continued its volatile trajectory. She would occasionally surface with phone calls or text messages, sometimes sober and remorseful, other times clearly intoxicated and bitter. Must be nice to play house with my son while running the state. She slurred during one late-night call that woke me from a dead sleep. Governor Abraham Wilson, everybody's hero. These calls were difficult. But the harder moments came when she would suddenly decide to be a mother again, showing up unannounced, demanding to see Tyler. "I have rights, you know," she would insist. Despite having failed to follow through with any of the requirements the court had established for supervised visitation, I tried to maintain a balanced approach, wanting Tyler to have a relationship with his mother when she was stable enough, but also protecting him from the emotional whiplash of her unpredictable behavior. We established clear boundaries. Visits had to be scheduled in advance, she needed to be sober, and the visits would take place in public places or with a professional supervisor present. Jessica railed against these conditions, and inevitably, my parents took her side. "You're using your position to keep Jessica from her child," my mother accused during one of our infrequent phone conversations. "You've always been jealous of her, and now you're punishing her when she's struggling." "Mom, these aren't my rules. They're the court's requirements based on Jessica's history. You could change those rules if you wanted to. You're the governor, for goodness sake." This fundamental misunderstanding of both my role and my motivations was consistent. In their eyes, my position was meant to be used for personal advantage, not public service. The concept that I would not use governmental power to circumvent proper channels for personal matters was foreign to them. Meanwhile, rumors began circulating in our hometown and among extended family that I was an unfit guardian who had manipulated the system to take Tyler away from his mother. These stories, I later learned, originated with my parents. "I ran into your Aunt Diane at the grocery store," my cousin told me during a rare family gathering. "She said your mom told her you won't let Jessica see Tyler at all and that you threaten to have her arrested if she tries." These lies hurt, but I refused to engage in family drama that would only harm Tyler further. He was now old enough to understand more about his mother's issues and my complicated relationship with my parents. I answered his questions honestly, but tried not to burden him with adult problems. "Why don't Grandma and Grandpa visit us?" he asked one day, after seeing a friend's grandparents pick him up from school. I chose my words carefully. They have different ideas about family than I do, and sometimes that makes it hard for us to be close. "Is it because of me?" he asked, the insecurity of his early years momentarily visible beneath the confident teenager he was becoming. "Absolutely not," I assured him. "It's about adult disagreements that started long before you were born. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and anyone who doesn't see what an amazing person you are is missing out." He seemed satisfied with this answer, though I knew the questions would evolve as he got older. Around this time, Jessica met Marcus Donovan, a man with his own troubled history, including previous arrests for domestic violence, though the charges had been dropped. She moved in with him after knowing him for just a few weeks, a pattern that had repeated throughout her adult life. I became concerned when Tyler returned from a supervised visit with Jessica and mentioned that Mom's new boyfriend doesn't like me much. "What makes you say that?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "He told Mom I was spoiled, and that she lets me get away with too much," Tyler explained with a shrug that didn't quite hide his hurt. "And when Mom went to the bathroom, he said I better not cause any problems for her or else." That or else led me to contact Jessica's caseworker and request changes to the visitation arrangement. I didn't want to cut off contact, but I needed to ensure Tyler's physical and emotional safety. Jessica was furious, accusing me of interfering because I felt threatened by her new relationship. "Marcus is the best thing that's ever happened to me," she insisted during a heated phone call. "He's helping me get my life together, and you're trying to ruin it because you're afraid I'll get Tyler back." "Jessica, I just want Tyler to be safe and feel comfortable during visits. You've poisoned him against me, against our whole family." These accusations were painful, but not surprising. What caught me off guard was when she added, "Mom and Dad agree with me. They say you've always been manipulative." It shouldn't have hurt after all these years of estrangement, but learning that my parents were actively undermining me to Jessica reopened old wounds. Despite these challenges, I continued working to build a stable life for Tyler and serve the people of our state. Tyler was thriving in school, participating in debate club, and volunteering with a local environmental organization. He had good friends and a supportive network of adults in his life, including my close friend Elena, who had become like an aunt to him, and his therapist Dr. Wilson, no relation, who helped him process his complicated family situation. After 3 years as Tyler's foster parent, with Jessica showing no sustainable progress toward reunification, I made the decision to pursue formal adoption. It was not a step I took lightly, but Tyler had been with me for more than half his life at that point, and we both needed the security of permanency. When I broached the subject with Tyler, now 12, his response was immediate and emotional. "You mean I would really be your son? Legally? Yes, but only if that's what you want too. This would be a decision we make together." His eyes filled with tears, but he was smiling. "I already feel like your son. This would just make it official, right?" The adoption process moved forward, though not without resistance. Jessica hired a lawyer to contest it, though she had missed multiple court dates and failed drug tests during the previous year. My parents submitted a letter to the court, questioning my motives, and claiming I had deliberately alienated Tyler from his mother and grandparents. Despite these obstacles, the adoption was finalized shortly after Tyler's 13th birthday. We had a small celebration with close friends, and Tyler proudly introduced himself with my last name for the first time. It should have been purely joyful, but I couldn't help feeling a deep sadness that my family had chosen resentment and denial over being part of our lives. 6 months after Tyler's adoption was finalized, the situation with Jessica reached a crisis point. She was arrested on multiple charges: fraud, possession of controlled substances with intent to distribute, and assault. The details that emerged painted a grim picture of how far she had fallen. Jessica and Marcus had been running a scheme to defraud elderly people out of their savings, with Jessica using her charm and education to gain trust, while Marcus handled the intimidation when victims became suspicious. During a confrontation with one elderly victim who threatened to go to the police, things had turned violent. The news broke nationally, with headlines inevitably connecting Jessica to me. Governor Wilson's sister arrested in elder fraud scheme. My communications team went into crisis management mode, but my primary concern was protecting Tyler from the media frenzy. At 14, he was too old to shield completely from the situation. I sat him down the evening the news broke, before he could hear about it from classmates or see it online. "Your mom has been arrested for some serious charges," I explained gently. "It's going to be in the news, and because of my position, people might talk about it more than they normally would." Tyler's face fell, but he didn't seem entirely surprised. "Is she going to prison?" "I don't know yet. There will be a trial, and the court will decide based on the evidence." He nodded, processing this information with the maturity that sometimes startled me. "Will I have to testify or anything?" "No, buddy. You don't have any involvement in this case." He seemed relieved, but remained thoughtful. "What about Marcus? Was he arrested too?" "Yes, they were both arrested." Tyler's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Good. He's a bad person, Abraham. Worse than you know." Something in his tone made me pause. "Tyler, did something happen with Marcus that you haven't told me about?" He hesitated, then admitted that during his last few visits with Jessica, Marcus had made threatening comments when Jessica wasn't in the room, telling Tyler that once they got him back, things would be very different and that Tyler would learn some respect. I was horrified that Tyler had kept this to himself, trying to handle adult problems alone. "I didn't want to make things worse," he explained, seeing my distress. "Mom seemed happy, and I only had to see them once a month." We talked for a long time that night about how he never needed to protect adults by keeping secrets, and that his safety and well-being were always the priority. I also scheduled an appointment with his therapist to help him process these revelations. Meanwhile, my parents launched their own offensive. My mother called, not to express concern about Jessica's situation or Tyler's well-being, but to blame me for not preventing Jessica's arrest. "You could have helped her," she insisted. "With all your connections and power, you could have gotten her into a program or found her a job. Instead, you were too busy playing governor and stealing her son to bother helping your own sister." I had long since learned that rational arguments didn't work with my mother, but I still tried. Mom, I offered to help Jessica get into treatment programs multiple times. I offered to pay for it. She refused. I can't force an adult to accept help. You didn't try hard enough, she insisted. And now look at the embarrassment this is causing for all of us. The embarrassment, not Jessica's crimes or their victims, was her primary concern. My father, usually the quiet enabler to my mother's more vocal criticism, actually called me separately, a rare occurrence. Your mother is taking this very hard, he said, as if that explained everything. Jessica says you could make this all go away if you wanted to. Dad, I cannot and would not interfere with a criminal investigation. Jessica committed serious crimes. Family helps family, Abraham, he responded, disappointment heavy in his voice. I thought we raised you better than this. The irony of him invoking family loyalty after years of emotional abandonment wasn't lost on me, but I kept that observation to myself. As Jessica's case moved toward trial, the pressure intensified. My political opponents used the situation to question my judgment and family values. My parents gave an interview to a local newspaper in our hometown, portraying themselves as heartbroken grandparents kept from their grandson by their power-hungry son. They conveniently omitted that they had visited Tyler exactly twice in the 8 years he had lived with me, both times for less than an hour, and had made no effort to call or contact him on birthdays or holidays. The stress began affecting Tyler at school. His grades, usually excellent, started slipping. He became quieter, more withdrawn. One night, I found him sitting on the floor of his closet, looking at old photographs of Jessica from before things had gotten so bad. I know she's done terrible things, he said when he realized I was there. But sometimes I still miss the mom I thought I had when I was little. I sat down beside him, looking at the photos of a younger, smiling Jessica holding a toddler Tyler. It's okay to miss her and love her, even while being angry and hurt by her choices, I told him. People are complicated, and so are the ways we feel about them. He leaned against my shoulder, suddenly seeming younger than his 14 years. I'm glad I have you. Even when things are hard, I always know you're there. As the trial date approached, my political advisors strongly recommended I distance myself from the proceedings entirely. Send a staff representative if you feel you must have someone there, my chief of staff suggested. But appearing yourself will only generate more media attention and connect you more directly to the case in the public eye. From a purely political standpoint, it was sound advice. But I had learned long ago that I couldn't make decisions based solely on political calculations. I need to be there, I explained. Not as the governor, but as Tyler's father and Jessica's brother. This is family, however dysfunctional. The night before the trial began, Tyler approached me with a serious expression. I want to know everything, he said, about my mom, about what she did, about what happens next. No more protecting me or keeping things vague. I'm old enough to understand. Looking at him, I realized he was right. He was still a child in many ways, but he deserved honesty about his own life story. Okay, I agreed. I'll tell you everything I know, answer any questions you have, and we'll figure out what happens next together. We stayed up late talking, with me explaining the details of Jessica's crimes, the likely outcomes of the trial, and answering his questions as honestly as I could. By the time we finished, it was nearly midnight, but Tyler seemed more at peace than he had in weeks. Thanks for not treating me like a little kid, he said as he headed to bed. It actually helps to know the whole truth, even when it's bad. The next morning, we both got up early. Tyler went to school, and I headed to the courthouse, prepared to face my sister, my parents, and the public scrutiny that would inevitably follow. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters when I arrived. I had come without a security detail, hoping to enter quietly through a side entrance, but someone had tipped off the press. Cameras flashed and questions were shouted as I made my way inside, responding only with a brief statement. I'm here as a family member, not in my official capacity. Inside, the courtroom was already filling with spectators, journalists, and the usual assortment of people who attended high-profile trials out of curiosity or boredom. I chose a seat near the back, wanting to observe without becoming part of the spectacle. Jessica was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her once carefully maintained appearance now haggard. Her hair, which she used to highlight and style meticulously, hung limp and dull around her face. She scanned the courtroom, her eyes briefly meeting mine before darting away, her expression hardening into a glare. Marcus was led in separately, his muscular frame and aggressive posture, a stark contrast to Jessica's diminished presence. He whispered something to her when he sat down that made her shoulders tense. My parents entered just before proceedings began, my mother clutching my father's arm for support, both dressed formally, as if attending church. They chose seats on the opposite side of the courtroom from me, my mother deliberately looking everywhere but in my direction. The judge, Honorable Diana Lawrence, was known for running a tight courtroom and having little patience for dramatics. She called the court to order, and the proceedings began with opening statements. The prosecutor laid out a damning case: systematic targeting of elderly victims, elaborate deception, and finally violence when the scheme began to unravel. Jessica and Marcus had stolen over $600,000 from 12 victims, most of whom were over 70 years old. Jessica's defense lawyer attempted to paint her as a victim of circumstances and Marcus's influence, suggesting that her history of substance abuse had made her vulnerable to manipulation. Marcus's attorney, meanwhile, implied that the whole scheme had been Jessica's idea, with his client merely following her lead. The finger pointing between the defendants created a tension in the courtroom that was palpable. They had clearly turned on each other in an attempt to minimize their own culpability. As victim testimony began, the true impact of Jessica and Marcus's actions became clear. Elderly men and women described how they had lost retirement savings, money for medical care, and inheritances meant for grandchildren. One couple in their 80s had been forced to move in with their adult son after losing their life savings. Throughout the testimony, Jessica kept her head down, while Marcus maintained an expression of bored indifference that seemed to anger Judge Lawrence, who watched him with narrowed eyes. When the prosecution called my mother as a character witness for Jessica, I tensed in my seat. She walked to the stand, with the dignified bearing she had always maintained in public, smoothing her skirt as she sat down. After establishing her relationship to Jessica, the prosecutor asked a series of questions about Jessica's childhood and character. My mother painted a picture of Jessica as a sensitive, talented girl who had been derailed by unfortunate circumstances and associations. Jessica was always so caring, so attuned to others' needs, she claimed, her voice catching with emotion. This behavior is completely out of character for the daughter I raised. During cross-examination, the prosecutor asked about Jessica's history of substance abuse and previous legal issues. My mother became defensive. Jessica has struggled, yes, but she was failed by those who should have helped her, she said, her gaze drifting meaningfully toward where I sat. Especially those in positions of power and influence who could have intervened but chose not to. The prosecutor followed up. Are you referring to someone specific, Mrs. Wilson? My mother straightened in her seat. My son, Abraham, has risen to a position of considerable influence. He could have used that influence to help Jessica find appropriate treatment, employment, support. Instead, he chose to take her son and build his political career while his sister suffered. The judge interrupted. Mrs. Wilson, please restrict your answers to the questions asked. But the damage was done. Several journalists were already scribbling notes, and I could feel curious eyes turning in my direction. My father testified next, echoing my mother's portrayal of Jessica as a victim of circumstance rather than someone responsible for her own choices. He too made veiled references to my failure to help family when it counted. Other family members and friends were called, each seemingly coached to reinforce the narrative that Jessica had been a good person led astray, with implication after implication that I had somehow contributed to her downfall by not using my position to help her. I maintained a neutral expression throughout, though internally I cycled through hurt, anger, and a deep sadness for the distorted family dynamics playing out in public view. On the third day of the trial, Jessica herself took the stand. She had been cleaned up for her testimony, wearing a conservative dress provided by her lawyer, her hair neatly styled. She looked more like the sister I remembered from years ago, which made her testimony all the more jarring. She admitted to participation in the fraud scheme, but insisted she had been coerced by Marcus, who she now claimed had been physically and emotionally abusive. She expressed remorse for the victims, but continued to deflect responsibility onto external factors: her addiction, Marcus's influence, lack of support from those who could have helped. During cross-examination, the prosecutor methodically dismantled her claims of being merely a pawn in Marcus's scheme, presenting evidence that she had been the primary contact with victims and had managed the financial aspects of the fraud. As Jessica's testimony concluded, she looked directly at me for the first time and declared loudly enough for everyone to hear, "My own brother sits there in judgment, the almighty Governor Wilson, who took my son and left me with nothing. Is it any wonder I made desperate choices?" Judge Lawrence banged her gavel. "The witness will restrict her comments to answering the questions posed by counsel." Jessica fell silent, but the outburst had achieved its purpose. Every eye in the courtroom was now on me, including the judges. Judge Lawrence studied me for a long moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then her eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Counsel, approach the bench," she ordered. The prosecutors and defense attorneys huddled with the judge for a tense conference, with occasional glances in my direction. When they returned to their tables, the judge addressed the courtroom. "We will take a 15-minute recess. When we return, I expect all testimony to remain focused on the facts of this case, not personal grievances or speculations." During the recess, I remained in my seat, aware of the whispers and stares around me. My parents exited without looking in my direction. When court resumed, Marcus took the stand, presenting a very different version of events than Jessica had. He portrayed himself as a businessman who had gotten in over his head, and Jessica as the mastermind who had planned the fraud and convinced him to participate. The testimony continued with various expert witnesses and investigators until finally all evidence had been presented. Closing arguments were scheduled for the following morning. As the courtroom began to empty, Judge Lawrence looked directly at me again, then spoke to her clerk. The clerk approached me moments later. "Judge Lawrence would like to see you in her chambers, sir." I followed the clerk, aware of the murmurs this unusual request generated. In the judge's private chambers, she was removing her robe when I entered. "Governor Wilson," she said, gesturing for me to take a seat. "I apologize for not recognizing you earlier. You were sitting so quietly in the back." "I was trying to keep a low profile, Your Honor." She nodded understanding. "I wanted to speak with you privately, because the comments made in my courtroom today were inappropriate and potentially prejudicial. I want to assure you that they will have no bearing on my judgment of this case." "I appreciate that, Your Honor." She studied me for a moment. "It can't be easy. Sitting through this trial with your family painting such a creative version of events." I chose my words carefully. Family situations are often complicated. I'm just here to understand what happened and to be present as Jessica's brother, regardless of our differences. "And as Tyler's father," she added. "I handled your adoption case last year. I don't typically remember every case that comes through my courtroom, but yours stuck with me. The care and stability you've provided that boy, despite challenging circumstances, was impressive." I was surprised she had made the connection. "Thank you, Your Honor. Tomorrow, when I deliver my verdict and sentencing, there may be more emotional outbursts. I wanted you to be prepared for that possibility." I nodded my understanding, and she dismissed me with a respectful nod. The following morning, the courtroom was even more crowded, as people anticipated the verdict. I arrived early, taking the same seat as before. My parents entered with the same deliberate avoidance of my section of the room. Jessica and Marcus were brought in separately, both looking tense. After closing arguments, Judge Lawrence announced she would deliver her verdict immediately rather than taking time for deliberation, as the evidence was clear. She found both Jessica and Marcus guilty on all counts. During the sentencing phase, character witnesses were called one final time. My mother took the stand again, pleading for leniency for Jessica, once more implying that she had been failed by her family, particularly me. As my mother returned to her seat, Judge Lawrence shuffled some papers, then looked up, her gaze landing directly on me. "Before I pronounce sentence, "There's something I need to clarify," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the now silent courtroom. "Throughout this trial, there have been insinuations about family members who allegedly failed to help the defendant, specifically Governor Abraham Wilson." A murmur ran through the courtroom at the direct mention of my title. Jessica's head snapped up, and my mother froze halfway to her seat. "Wait, you're the governor?" Judge Lawrence said, though her tone made it clear she already knew the answer. The theatrical quality of her question suggested she was making a point for the record and for everyone present. The courtroom fell completely silent. My mother remained standing, her mouth slightly open, seemingly unable to process this public acknowledgement of my position. Judge Lawrence continued, "I've reviewed records related to this case, including family court documents. Governor Wilson has, contrary to implications made in this courtroom, made multiple documented attempts to assist the defendant with rehabilitation opportunities, employment connections, and support services, all of which were declined. Furthermore, his guardianship and subsequent adoption of Tyler Wilson was undertaken at the recommendation of child welfare professionals and approved by this very court due to consistent evidence of the defendant's inability to provide a safe, stable home." Jessica slumped in her chair, while my mother finally found her way back to her seat, her face pale. "This court will not allow inaccurate characterizations to stand unchallenged," Judge Lawrence stated firmly. "Now, regarding sentencing, she sentenced Jessica to 8 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5, contingent upon completion of a comprehensive rehabilitation program. Marcus received 12 years due to his prior record and the evidence of his role in the physical intimidation of victims." As Jessica was led away, she looked back at me one last time, her expression a complex mixture of anger, shame, and something that might have been regret. My parents hurried from the courtroom without speaking to me, my mother leaning heavily on my father's arm, both looking stunned by the public correction of their narrative. I sat alone in the emptying courtroom, processing the events of the day and preparing myself for the conversations I would need to have with Tyler when he returned from school. The media coverage of Jessica's trial focused heavily on Judge Lawrence's unexpected acknowledgement of my identity and her public correction of the narrative my family had been pushing. Headlines ranged from sympathetic, "Governor Wilson's family ordeal reveals personal integrity," to more sensationalistic, "Family drama in governor's mansion. Wilson faces sister's crimes with dignity." I issued a brief statement asking for privacy for my family, particularly Tyler, but otherwise refused to comment on the personal aspects of the case. My approval ratings, somewhat surprisingly, rose in the aftermath, with many citizens expressing respect for how I had handled such a difficult situation. When Tyler came home from school the day of the verdict, he had already seen news alerts on his phone. "So Mom's going to prison," he said, dropping his backpack by the door. It wasn't a question. "Yes, for 8 years, though she could be paroled earlier if she completes rehabilitation." He nodded, his expression difficult to read. "And Judge Lawrence told everyone you're the governor, and that Grandma and Grandpa were lying about you not helping Mom?" News traveled fast in the age of social media. Something like that. She corrected some misconceptions that had been presented in court. Tyler sat heavily on the couch. "Good. I'm tired of them making you the bad guy when you're the only one who's actually been there for me." We talked for a long time that evening about Jessica, about forgiveness, about the complicated nature of family. Tyler asked thoughtful questions about addiction and mental health, trying to understand his mother's choices. "Do you think she'll ever get better? Really better?" he asked. "I hope so," I answered honestly. "The rehabilitation program the judge ordered is excellent. If she commits to it, there's a good chance she could make real progress." "Would I have to live with her if she does? When she gets out?" His voice held a note of anxiety. "No," I assured him. "You're my son now, legally, and in every way that matters. Your home is with me." The relief in his eyes was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. No child should have to worry about the stability of their home. 3 weeks after the trial, I received an unexpected phone call from my father. Our conversation was awkward, stilted, but it was the first time he had initiated contact in years. "Your mother is having a hard time," he began, which was his typical opening for any difficult conversation. But I wanted to. Well, to say that perhaps we've been unfair in some of our assessments. Coming from my father, this was as close to an apology as I was likely to get. I appreciate that, Dad. Tyler, he's doing well with you? The question seemed to cost him something to ask. Very well. He's on the honor roll, has good friends, plays soccer. He's a great kid. That's good. A long pause followed. Maybe we could see him sometime. If that would be all right. It was a small opening, but an opening nonetheless. I think that could be arranged. I'll talk to Tyler about it. When I discussed the possibility with Tyler, his response was cautiously open. I barely know them, he said. But I guess I could meet them for lunch or something. As long as you're there too. 2 weeks later, we met my parents at a restaurant halfway between our homes. The conversation was strained at first, with my mother clearly struggling to reconcile her long-held narrative about me with the reality of my position and the public correction she had received in court. But as the meal progressed, Tyler's natural charm began to break through the tension. He told them about school, about his friends, about the science project that had won first place in the state competition. My father, to my surprise, engaged genuinely with Tyler's interests, asking thoughtful questions about his studies and activities. My mother remained more reserved, but I caught her watching Tyler with an expression of wonder when she thought no one was looking, perhaps seeing for the first time the remarkable young man he was becoming. As we prepared to leave, my mother finally addressed me directly. "The house looks nice," she said stiffly. "You've done a good job with it." And with Tyler, from her, this was monumental. I nodded my acknowledgement. Thank you. We didn't schedule another meeting right away, but the door had been cracked open for possible future contact. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation exactly, but it was something. Meanwhile, Jessica began her sentence and, somewhat to my surprise, enrolled immediately in the rehabilitation program. Her counselor contacted me after a few months to relay Jessica's request for a letter from Tyler. After consulting with Tyler's therapist, we agreed he could write to his mother if he wanted to, with no pressure either way. Tyler thought about it for several days before sitting down to compose a simple, honest letter. He told her about school, about his friends, about his life with me. He didn't offer forgiveness or make accusations, just shared his reality in straightforward terms. Jessica's response, when it came, was the first genuine communication I had received from my sister in years. There were no manipulations, no blame, no requests for favors or money, just an acknowledgement of her mistakes and the hurt she had caused, particularly to Tyler. "I'm trying to get better," she wrote. "Not to get Tyler back or to fix the past, but because I need to fix myself. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you both to know I'm finally doing the work." 6 months after the trial, we had settled into a new normal. Tyler was thriving in school and had started talking about college, though it was still years away. I had found my footing as governor, focusing on education reform and expanding support services for families in crisis. We had a growing support network of friends who had become like family. Elena, my friend from my early days in social services, had become a constant presence in our lives. Tyler's best friend Max and his parents often joined us for dinner or weekend activities. My chief of staff Barbara and her husband had practically adopted us both, including us in their family holidays and celebrations. One evening, as Tyler and I were cleaning up after dinner, he brought up something that had clearly been on his mind. "Abraham," he said, using my name as he often did despite the adoption, "what makes a real family? Because I've been thinking that maybe it's not always the people you're related to." I considered his question carefully. I think family is about who shows up for you consistently, who loves you even when it's difficult, who puts your well-being ahead of their own wants or convenience. He nodded thoughtfully. "That's what I was thinking too. Like, biologically Jessica is my mom and Margaret and Richard are my grandparents, but Elena feels more like family than they do. Same with Max's parents, and Barbara and Jim. Family can be the people we choose," I agreed. "And sometimes we're lucky enough that the people we're related to by blood are also the people who show up for us. But when that's not the case, we create family from the people who love us well." Tyler was quiet for a moment, wiping a plate with unusual focus. "I'm glad you chose me," he finally said. "Even when it was hard and complicated and probably would have been easier not to." I put down the glass I was drying and turned to face him fully. "Choosing you was the best decision I ever made. Not always the easiest, but the best by far." He smiled, the open, genuine smile that always reminded me how far we had come from those first frightened days together. The journey hadn't been what either of us expected. A social worker who became a governor. A frightened little boy who became a confident young man. An unlikely family created not from obligation but from choice and love. Through all the challenges, the public scrutiny, the family conflict, and the personal sacrifices, we had discovered that true success isn't measured by titles or status or even the approval of those whose opinions once seemed to matter most. It's measured by the integrity with which we face our challenges, the compassion we show to others even when it's difficult, and the lives we touch along the way. As I looked at Tyler, I knew that no achievement in my public life could ever compare to the privilege of being his father. That was the real success story, the one that would matter long after my term as governor ended. And in the quiet of our kitchen, I found peace with all of it. My family's rejection, Jessica's struggles, the unexpected path my life had taken. Because that path, with all its difficulties, had led me to the remarkable young man standing before me. And for that, I could only be grateful. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice that others didn't understand but that you knew was right? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that sometimes. The family we choose is as important as the family we're born into. Thank you for listening. And remember that true success isn't about titles or status, but about the lives we touch and the love we give. I'm grateful for each of you being part of this journey with me.